Hello and welcome to our London History Podcast, where we share our love of London, its people, places and history. This podcast is designed for you to learn things about London that most Londoners don't even know, all in 20 minutes. I am your host, Hazel Baker, qualified London tour guide and CEO of londonguidedwalks.co.uk. And I am absolutely thrilled to be able to say that our guided walks and our private tours are now bookable online for 2021 and 2022. We also have self-guided tours available and treasure hunts for you to do all on your mobile phone on the streets of London. And if you're a little bit further away from us, then you can do a virtual guided tour, pay and play. And also we have a virtual escape room called Find the Phoenix. Get that cup of tea, put your feet up and enjoy. George Frederick Handel moved to London in 1711 at the age of 26 and lived here for the rest of his life, becoming a British citizen in 1727. He was a major benefactor of the Foundling Hospital, London's first home for abandoned children. His benefit concerts for the hospital raised many thousands of pounds. And it was also one of these charity concerts that Handel's Messiah was played for the very first time. Forwarding to the 20th century, a businessman by the name of Gerald Coke for over 60 years collected Handel's material, including books and libretti. To tell us more about the Gerald Coke Handel Collection is Katharine Hogg, librarian of the Gerald Coke Handel Collection at the Foundling Museum, where she has worked for over 20 years. She is also currently president of the UK branch of the International Association of Music Libraries. Katharine has degrees in music and librarianship and also works as a freelance music library consultant on various projects. Hello, Katharine. Thanks for joining us today.
You're welcome. Thank you. It's nice to be here.
I'm sure many of our listeners will want to know, what is the Gerald Coke Handel Collection?
It's a collection of memorabilia, music, books, scores, all sorts of things related to the composer Handel and his contemporaries. And it was collected by Gerald Coke over the whole of his lifetime in the 20th century.
And who was Gerald Coke?
Gerald Coke was a businessman who worked mainly in the city and made a lot of money and decided, instead of spending it on fast cars and yachts and so on, to actually just collect stuff.
And how did his collection begin?
He started with Mozart, but Mozart was very expensive and most of it had already been collected. But then he switched to Handel.
But why Handel then?
Because Handel lived most of his life in England, there was still a lot of stuff about, and it was quite cheap. You could pick stuff up for shillings, as he said, in the 1930s. You can't do that now, sadly. But so he did collect all this stuff, and it became the biggest private collection of Handel memorabilia in the world and Handel materials.
And how did this rather unique collection end up at the Foundling Museum?
Well, Handel was a big supporter of the Foundling Hospital. So that was an 18th century children's home, not quite an orphanage. These are children whose mothers couldn't look after them. And Handel did quite a lot of benefit concerts to support them. So Gerald Coke, when he was looking for somewhere to think about putting his collection, decided that would be a fitting place to put his collection as a sort of way of supporting the charity in a slightly different way. And at that point, the charity, which is now called Quorum, it's a childcare charity, established a separate charity to be the Foundling Museum, which tells the story of the Foundling Hospital and all the artists and creative people who supported it, which included Handel. And then there's also this massive collection of ephemera, as we call it, which is tickets and programmes and playbills and all sorts of bits and bobs, everything from a tobacco jar from the 19th century with a picture of Handel on it to a memory stick from 2009 anniversaries. And because we're a sort of mixed collection, we can have all this sort of stuff, which normally is slightly looked down upon, I suppose, by your traditional sort of institutions. But it's actually what makes the person come alive and the place come alive.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, history in essence is about people, and people have stuff. And that stuff tells you a lot about the people that own them and also about the people the stuff is about or the events. I have a box of programs from shows and musicals that I saw as a teenager and in my early 20s. And I would wait at the stage door and ask the performers to have their autograph right by their bio pages. And even though that's not worth anything, it does tell a story. So what kind of tickets and programs are in this collection?
So we've got tickets from the 18th century. They're beautiful sort of engraved artworks. They're sort of A5 even up to A4 sort of size, and they're works of art in their own right. And so that's tickets to, say, the Foundling Hospital Messiah performance in the 1770s, all to the big Handel festivals in the 1780s, and right up to. But some of the programs are quite fun as well, because even from the 18th century, people would scrawl on their programs. So you get these little notes saying "sublime aria" or "this isn't as good as last time I heard it," and things like that, which in an 18th century hand, it's quite fun to sort of see, someone was passing judgment even then. And often, as you say, even if you don't know who the person is, you can think, well, it's definitely an informed opinion. So they're quite fun to see.
It's interesting to think of these invitations, some of them being A4 size. So the size of them, is that because they're supposed to be seen? Are they going to be left on people's mantelpieces, do you think?
Well, I suppose so. I suppose it was just like today, you get when you have your invitation that you're very proud of, you stick it on your fireplace. And I can only think that because, of course, when you went to the concert, you gave it in and it was usually just ripped in half, just to cancel it, really. So we have two or three that have been ripped, but obviously the person decided to keep them, and now we've had them carefully put back together again. But then, of course, most of them were just throwaway items. And because they're actually beautiful little artworks, it seems sort of a shame. But that's the sort of stuff that is almost more interesting because people didn't keep it, and now we see how valuable it is. It tells you all sorts of things, what you did with your ticket and where you handed it in, and we have various sort of other documents that say that sort of thing, that you passed it in here and you gave it in there and it was stamped on the back. Some of them have lovely wax seals on as well, so they're really sort of they're tangible documents because somebody actually had that in their pocket or their purse or their handbag or whatever it was. You just need a few people who collected their stuff, as you say you did with your childhood collections. You just need a few people who collected their stuff, and if we can get those. Only recently we acquired a whole load of stuff from a Handel fan, shall we say, who'd been to every opera performance since whenever, and has got all the programs and all the tickets and his little notes and so on. And that's good stuff to have because that tells us about Handel now and how people still enjoy it now. So all these people shouldn't throw their stuff away too quickly, I think.
And what's your favourite item in the collection?
Well, I think actually my favourite thing is probably another little thing, which is Handel writing a receipt for borrowing the kettle drums from the Tower of London, and they were the only really big drums that you could get, and he wanted them for the Dead March in Saw, one of his oratorios. It's a big, serious piece, and the only place to borrow them was actually from the military. So we've got this lovely little receipt where I promised to bring them back in good repair, and he has to sign it, and he's doing that alongside writing all these amazing music. I like the way he has to deal with the everyday life at the same time, so that brings it home. And the other thing I'd probably like is his will, which is probably our star piece, and it is the original will that was in his bureau that it was opened when he died, and that just tells us quite a lot about the man because it starts with his servant for a start. The first person he mentions is his servant, which is really unusual in the 18th century. Usually the servants came at the end and got their 6 shillings or a year's wages, and he starts with the servant, and the family actually come at the end. And he hadn't fallen out with them, but of course they were back in Germany, and they sort of got the residue. But he wrote the will, and then he wrote several codicils, sort of extras over the 9 years after the will, mostly when someone had died and he wanted to reallocate whatever he was giving them. But also the last one, it mentions his neighbours, his apothecary, the people over the road, that sort of thing. So people who were very much in his actual daily life, probably. And that, I think that's quite a nice human touch because there's not a lot of letters that survive. There's a few, but not many. We haven't got reams and reams of them. And we actually have a few at the Gerald Coke Collection, but there aren't many out there at all. So actually, his will really tells us a lot about his social networks, really, who he knew and what he did and who he got on with and sort of who he didn't get on with, you can see by the people who weren't mentioned in the will. So that's quite a nice thing to have and see.
It's nice to see the man behind the request as well, isn't it?
Yeah, the will also shows mentions the Foundling Hospital because he left the score and parts of Messiah to them because he'd been doing these benefit concerts every year for 10 years to raise funds for them. And then he realised they wouldn't be able to carry on if they didn't actually have the music, because it wasn't published in those days. It was just manuscript copy. So in the will, he actually specifies that they copy out the score and parts of Messiah and give it to the hospital, which they did. It took them 3 weeks, and it's over 1,000 pages. And we've still got that. And that's also in the collections. You can see the will, and then you can see the music that was copied right next to it in 1759 on his instructions, which is still preserved. But they're nice things to sort of, again, it relates to real things that happened and real people, and you're right in the middle of London where it all happened.
That's brilliant. Partaking in fundraising for the Foundling Hospital for 10 years is a long time. How did he get into it at the beginning?
Well, we're not really sure. We know that his publisher, who was called John Walsh, had already been a donor, was a governor, which just meant you gave some money to the hospital. And we think he might have come to Handel and said, how about doing a benefit concert, which was a thing in the 18th century, just to finish off the building. They built the chapel, but it hadn't got any glass in the windows or any furniture. So this was a sort of like a final push to get that bit done. And Handel, in his hometown, would have been familiar with the idea, because there was a similar institution called the Frankische Stiftung in Halle, in Saxony, where he grew up. So he would have been used to the concept. And of course, across Europe, there were foundling hospitals, although this was the first one in England. But Venice and Rome and Paris and Amsterdam, all these places, they all had them. So it wasn't a sort of a strange idea. So he came along and offered this first concert in 1749, and he put together one of his pieces of music, as Handel often did. He borrowed his own music. If he had a good tune, he thought, I'll just use that again. So he'd written the Messiah a few years before, but he didn't offer that the first time. He made up a new concert, which included the fireworks music, and which was new out that year. And he put together this piece called the Foundling Hospital Anthem, where he made up some rather nice tunes, and then he put the whole of the Hallelujah chorus into it. And he got away with it, as it were, because nobody really knew Messiah. Now we obviously associate those two pieces, and everyone's heard the Hallelujah chorus, even if they don't think they know what it is. But he just put it in there, and nobody would have thought, oh, that's from Messiah, because most people hadn't even heard of it. And because that concert was a big success, then the next year the governors said, oh, can you do us another one? And so he did. He just did the whole Messiah then. And that was really useful for Handel, because it was such a religious piece on such a sacred sort of subject that you couldn't do it in a theatre, really. It had been done in a theatre, but people had written to the papers complaining about it, saying it was too religious and you couldn't have something like that in such a dodgy place as a theatre. And they didn't really do concerts in churches in those days, because they were sort of sacred spaces. But doing it in this not quite finished chapel for a good cause was a sort of perfect, ticked all the boxes. And in fact, they printed far too many tickets, and it was double booked. People were turned away at the door, all a bit embarrassing. I think, they didn't have a central system really for ticket booking. They sent the tickets out to all the different coffee shops, and that was usually where you bought your ticket. So they'd have no central control over how many they'd sold. So Handel came back and did a second concert 2 weeks after the first. But the Prince of Wales used to come and sort of patronise these events. And because he showed up, that meant all the other nobility showed up. And it was a social thing to do. Bit like Wimbledon or Ascot or something these days. It was a place to be seen. You were seen to be doing good works, and you were just seen to be in the in crowd, supporting the Live Aid of the day, as we like to call it.
And I'm guessing then, if you've got the programme, then you'll know who the performers were as well.
Yeah, I think we're not really sure whether he got the singers or somebody else did. He had an assistant manager called John Christopher Smith, who was his sort of what we'd call them an agent, but they organised the copying basically in those days. You hired all your copyists to copy out your manuscripts and so on. And he was also a musician, and he was the first organist of the hospital as well. So he would have done the logistics. Handel would probably have pulled in the big names. They would have come because Handel asked. And there's one particular man, John Beard, who was a tenor, and he was the top tenor of the day, and Handel wrote quite a lot of his music, especially for John Beard. And John Beard came every year, gave his performance and didn't charge, which is very nice. We've got the old payment lists, and it says how much. The soprano always gets the most, £1 and £1, and it works down to the viola players at the bottom of the list. We've got a very nice portrait of him actually as well in the collection. And so, yeah, he was definitely philanthropic. And a few of the others didn't charge either, or they usually the top performers who could probably afford to not charge, those lower down the pecking order, they did get a fee for paying. They got their 10 and 6, which was the standard rate, it seems to be.
So with the concert being a success, they were able to get their windows and furniture for the chapel then?
Well, apparently, yes. And then they wanted an organ, and then they wanted Handel to be there. In fact, Handel paid for the first organ for the chapel, so he was quite good. But it wasn't a very good one, it turns out. It was made by some second-rate organ player who didn't deliver on time, so they actually had a new organ a few years later. But The concert did bring a lot of money, but obviously the governors realised they were onto a good thing, and so that's why they encouraged Handel to come back every year, because he was a big name and he brought all the nobility, and it was all about raising the profile of the charity. And of course the artists were also raising the profile, William Hogarth and the others, and they would have, we don't have documentation, but they would have known each other, they would have seen each other. And there are people of the time who came to the Messiah and write in their diaries, oh, I went to the Foundling Messiah. That was obviously such a thing that everyone would know what you were talking about. And they also went to see the paintings, so it was sort of a cultural day out, really. You got to see the art that the artists had been donating, that was decorating the walls, and you got a concert thrown in. And then the idea was that you'd carry on coming, you'd come back to the chapel and listen to the choir, these all sweet little foundlings singing their Sunday services, and you'd put some money in the pot for that. So that's why it was really important to have the chapel looking nice and being the sort of place that rich people would want to come to. In fact, Charles Dickens had a pew in the hospital chapel. He was a regular. He used to turn up, but as you just lived down the road. And John Stanley, the blind composer, again, he's quite well known, Stanley's trumpet tune. He had a pew, and he actually took over the concerts after Handel died. He took over organising them. So all these sort of things and all the bits of paper and music associated with them are things that we have in the collection. So it's quite a sort of good anecdotal social account of life, musical life going on around that area at that time.
Another big event in the social calendar was the Vauxhall Pleasure Gardens. Do you have anything in the collection relating to that?
Oh yes, we've got beautiful prints of the Vauxhall Gardens actually, and the music going on there, showing how lovely it was. And also in the Foundling Hospital's own collection, among the tokens that the mothers left with their babies, there's a ticket for entrance to Vauxhall Gardens, which suggests that might be where that little foundling was conceived, because obviously a lot went on behind the bushes down in Vauxhall as well as up front, as it were. But yeah, we've got some beautiful tickets. We've got accounts of the collection. So yeah, I mean, it was over the river, and they rehearsed the fireworks music down at Vauxhall Gardens, and there's a famous account of, it took 3 hours to cross London Bridge. There was only one bridge, and the traffic hold up was 3 hours because everybody wanted to go, and presumably all the boats are in use. Most people would get across the river by boat, and we've got some beautiful images as well of musicians in the boats, because it was quite common to have these water parties like the water music was written for, where you've got a little band in one boat and you're in the next boat and you just hear the music floating across the water. So they're rather nice things to have as well.
Doesn't it sound wonderful? Just lying in a boat, listening to this exquisite music washing over you and seeing the lights flickering. They must have been totally wondrous. Another benefit of this collection is that you have found some things that you weren't expecting. Isn't that right?
Yes, it's nice because Gerald Coke collected really as a Handel fan, I suppose. He bought things that and didn't really look at all the other stuff in great detail that was in the collection. So we were going through doing sort of detailed cataloguing when all the material came to the museum, and we found this anonymous sort of collection of manuscript pieces of music, and it had some Handel and it had various other bits, and one of them was by Vivaldi, and we thought, okay, it's another sonata in D major by Vivaldi. You wrote hundreds of those. And then a Vivaldi scholar came in and said, but this is one we've never seen before. And it turned out it was two different pieces by Vivaldi that were just not known. So of course now they are known, and they've been recorded and publicised and so on. But I have to say, when I was a music student, I never thought that one day I'd discover some unknown Vivaldi, so that was rather nice. And then we bought another volume, a scrapbook of music that was actually a book about Handel, with lots of extra stuff stuck in, these tickets and programmes and all these bits. And one of them was a sheet of manuscript music. It turned out it was the missing first page from an anthem by William Boyce, who was the master of the King's music in the 18th century. So the rest of the manuscript is all intact up in Birmingham, and this page was just the missing opening page. Someone in the 19th century had just thought, I'll cut that page out and stick it in my scrapbook, and never given a thought to the fact that there was no other copy, so nobody would know what it sounded like. So it's nice to find these little surprises, and we always look out and hope we might find another one yet.
How fantastic! To our listeners, you are able to visit the Foundling Museum. It is a real hidden gem in Bloomsbury. And it takes about an hour to get round, do you think?
Yeah, I'd say you can see it all in an hour-ish, really. It depends how long you want to spend in the musical chairs, which are in the Handel Gallery. And we've got these 4 wing armchairs with little speakers in the wings. So when you're a bit footsore and you've been around all the other galleries, you can just sit in one of those, select which track you want to listen to, and listen to a couple of hours of opera or oratorio, church music, whatever takes your fancy. And sometimes we do find people have nodded off a little bit at the end of the session, but I'm always quite tempted. I never have time to do it myself.
I mean, what's nice about this collection is that it's got that human element. You don't have to be into Handel or specifically his music. It's the human connection in the collection that draws on from lots of different things throughout the years, isn't it? It's not just during the time of Handel. I think that tells you something about our relationship with Handel and his music over a time as well. And that's quite special.
Yeah, I think because although people might not think they know anything about Handel, they'll have seen Johnny English, so they'll have heard Zadok the Priest, which features in the coronation scene and has been at every coronation since Handel's day, which he wrote specially for the occasion. And they'll think, oh, yeah, that's the guy who wrote that. And then we have got a nice big timeline on a table in the middle of the gallery, so you can relate it to this is the year that the Bank of England did something, or there was an earthquake in London, or Gulliver's Travels was written. The idea is that wherever you come from, you can get some sort of context about it and feel that you can connect to this person. And conversely, because Handel, Messiah especially, but Handel generally, is part of the British sort of culture now, it's part of the establishment, really, his music. You can't move for hearing a Messiah at Christmas, can you, really, in every little choral society in the country. So pretty well everybody has heard that. Whether they know they have heard it.
So for the listeners, all the information about the museum, some pictures and all the rest of it can be, as usual, found on our show notes. So go to londonguidedwalks.co.uk/podcast and click on episode 57. Katharine, thank you so much for opening our eyes to the London life of Handel and also the wonderful collection.
Thank you very much.
If you would like to hear more from Katharine, then you can do so by clicking on the show notes and also then becoming a patron. I've added in some wonderful anecdotes into the extras there, which also means that we are able to keep the podcast ad-free. Thanks very much for listening. Until next time.